Hello, lovely people. So excited to be here on the Prada platform today to have a conversation I've personally so been looking forward to with somebody who endlessly inspires me, Ebonee Davis. I kind of just want to dive right in because I know these 30 minutes are going to go by so quickly. But I'm so excited to be in conversation. I feel like not only has it been like a decade since I've seen you in person.
I know it's been a minute.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like the reason I wanted to just have this moment to talk was because when I've been a follower of you, of your Twitter, of everything that you do for years now. And I think even your TED Talk is a glimpse into just all that you have to share with the world. But I also love the conversation that you consistently have on our role as people in media, our role as creatives, and what responsibility we hold. Um,
Right.
but I feel like a lot of that comes from just personal, being able to translate personal values and belief systems into your particular industry. So I guess I say all this to say I kind of want to start from the beginning of why did you feel like this space of creativity was for you, and why do you feel like this is also an avenue to continue to fight for equity and equality?
I never thought it was an avenue
Mm,
like for equity and equality. I was fighting my own mental health battles, and that's what kind
right.
of led me to this place. I was trying to create an identity for myself outside of the identity that had been handed down to me,
Mm-hmm.
that had been force fed to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is from the time I was young, parents, community, media, programming, things like that. But then also, once I got into the fashion industry, just the narrow standards of beauty that we have to fit into.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my experience getting into the industry was it was heartbreaking. It just took a huge toll on my self esteem. I remember going door after door and being told no, and then finally getting signed by an agency. And their welcome speech was, when one of our other Black models is available, we'll push for you. So, again, reinforcing that idea of tokenism, reinforcing
Mm-hmm.
the idea that there can only be one. So, I really just was fighting and advocating for myself, fighting and advocating for my own voice. And then when I began to do research, it gave me a greater historical context that I could then put my personal experience into and be like, wow, I'm actually the product of a system that is
Mm-hmm.
designed for me to go through these experiences, and so many other people are going through them as well. And so then there became a responsibility. It's like with that awareness came the responsibility. Okay, this isn't just about my personal liberation anymore. This is about freedom for all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, but I love even starting at that touch point of personal liberation, because I think particularly right now for people that are just entering the space of what it means to be socially engaged, I know there are a lot of people looking for what their touch point is, because we oftentimes operate on a system of like, if I can't relate, then it doesn't pertain to me. And we're in too dangerous of a time for that to be the mentality. But I'd love to, I think, dive deeper into that question of like, how you translated that moment of personal liberation, because I think it speaks to even the theme of this conversation of how do you stay authentic to yourself, and
Yes.
how does that authenticity lead to a door of how you then connect to other people.
It's for me, it started with hair. It started with something
Mm-hmm.
very just physical, and I think a lot of people would deem hair unimportant. I feel otherwise. Like, as a Black woman, I think hair is so important. It's our
Mm-hmm.
our glory. But it started with hair, and it became a journey of just unpacking the other beliefs that I had about myself. So, the first belief being that my natural hair isn't good enough, and then other beliefs being, oh, I'm inadequate, or I'm not good enough to hold space in this room, or I'm not
Mm-hmm.
intelligent enough to be in this place. And those beliefs were really the foundation of my actions, the foundation that was dictating how I moved to the world. And I think that's the point that we have to address, is that we all have these underlying beliefs that are subconsciously running how we function in any space in this world. And those beliefs can so heavily be dictated by media. And that's what I want us all to awaken to. You know, the responsibility of the media, but then the responsibility of the self also to go within, because the media, as much as we can offer representation, which I believe is so important, we also have to realize that the fight for liberation is very much an individual thing. Although we are fighting for the collective, the revolution takes place on the inside first. It takes place in your heart. It takes place in your mind. You know, you have
That's
to
a
work
t-shirt.
to act and free yourself before you can go out and free anybody else. And I think that's the issue that we've seen with activism. You know, this in this recent sort of new resurgence of activism, is that people want to like go out and help the other without looking within and examining the beliefs that they hold that are self-limiting, and self-suppressing. So
Right.
yeah.
No, I mean, it really speaks to, because I relate to that process of, I even remember I grew up in a household where we really didn't watch television except for Saturdays for like an hour. And what we were watching was very representative of who we were. Everything about how I grew up was always like the books that I was reading were either about my cultures or about global cultures. And so it was never centered in this kind of Eurocentric or dominant culture narrative. And I think the reason I mention that is because I remember almost the regression, for lack of a better term, when I finally started watching more, when I finally started opening myself up more, and having felt like I was given such a solid foundation.
Yeah.
I had to intentionally, and my family had to intentionally help reinforce that, because I remember being 13 and being on a TV show, and it was the first time wearing makeup. It was my first time straightening my hair regularly. And there were things in which I didn't realize how quickly I felt like I became dependent on that to
Right.
feel like I was ready for the world, to
Right.
feel like I was pretty. And it was all these things that were reinforced in matters of months, after years of growing up in a very intentional household. And I think for me, that's when I personally learned the impact of media, because I had always seen the positive side of it when it was reflective of the world, and then being in a space where I saw exactly how quickly it could undo one's confidence, how quickly it could assert that you don't belong in a certain space. It was that intentional moment, even going back to hair, of I remember the first time I straightened my hair and going to school, people being like, "Oh my God, I like this so much better."
Right.
First of all, I didn't ask. No one asked. And I always loved my curly hair, but I think being on television, it became increasingly important for me in a way that I maybe didn't understand before, of just what my curls meant to me, being able to display that on a larger screen. And so
Right.
being in a role in which it was like, well, you're going to see this character go through her protective styles, through what she wears at night, through her curls, through her day two curls, through her wash days, and all of it, because that was important just to me and what I was able to do in this one character on screen. But doing that self work is so essential. And I know it looks different for everyone, and it's been such a constant conversation in our household too. But I'd love to know just kind of what that looks like for you. Because for me, I know I turn a lot to reading, I turn a lot to podcasts and people like James Baldwin to kind of pull inspiration, partially because I'm a history nerd, but I know that process looks different for everybody.
For sure. I think turning to our ancestors is so important. You know, at the very least, to just have whatever you're feeling affirmed. I think that was such a big thing for me. Growing up, I held on to a lot of resentment toward my parents. We grew up like without a lot of money, didn't have a lot of resources. I experienced so many things that I felt like were just extremely unfair as a result of that. And I made it my parents' fault. And then growing up and reading Baldwin and reading Maya Angelou and all of these ancestors who could offer insight into their experiences, allowed for me to have that greater context to then go, oh wait, yeah, this isn't my parents' fault, which then allowed me to offer them forgiveness and to heal. So that's a lot of what my healing process has looked like, is just like putting my experience into context and allowing that to be the medicine that then comes in and heals me. Other than that, just spending a lot of time with myself is so important. I'm a person who recharges in solitude. And so making sure that I'm intentional about setting time aside to just be with myself and to be able to process my thoughts and reflect is of the highest importance. And just self-honesty and accountability, honestly, are accountability and discipline, I would say, are the most important tools in this journey toward healing. Because what we have to understand is that we are sovereign beings. You know, we are co-creators of our reality, and we create and shape and mold our reality through our belief systems, through the things that we believe about ourselves that are then projected out into the world and reflected back to us. So we have to be accountable for those creations. And if we can get honest with ourselves about the beliefs and the habits and the patterns that are embedded with us, that are no longer serving us, then we can do the work to eliminate them, and make space to bring in some new energy, some new patterns, some new habits, some new ways of thinking that then allows our world to reflect what we want to experience.
I remember reading recently somebody saying uh, the importance of normalizing changing your beliefs once you learn new information.
That is a word.
Yes. And it's so impactful, I think, especially now, living in a very public way, in which, regardless of whether or not you are in the space of media, I think many people have public platforms well before we used to. And oftentimes, what I've seen is this adamance to stick to one's opinion regardless, because there's more shame attached in acknowledging that you're wrong versus the pride in acknowledging that you're growing.
Learn something. Right, exactly. We have to get excited about our own evolution.
Right. And I think, kind of shifting gears a little bit, the one thing I've always loved from your page or any touch point I have from you is just the authenticity of just your creativity and everything that you collaborate with. And this is a conversation that I was having recently with my brothers, especially in this time in which a lot of our conversations are, of course, about what's going on right now, rightfully so. But I think the one thing that has been really important for me is that I think for so many people living in intersections, particularly Black and brown people, and then whatever other intersection you live in, it feels as though our ability to imagine, our ability to be creative has been taken away because so much of our time is focused on surviving, so much of our time is focused on pushing forward, which I think is why I've always felt so impacted whenever I see you, because I think it's always exemplified the power of imagination as a constructive tool. And I'm wondering how you approach those creative moments. I know what I see and what I feel impacted by, but even going into that, what's the importance of all those moments for you?
For sure. I think imagination is, you know, the Black Panthers have those big guns in the pictures. Like our imagination this time is those big guns. Like those are our big guns. You know, that's the tool that we're fighting with. That is our force to create change. Through our collective reimagining of what the world can be, we are going to bring about that change. That's why I continue to reiterate, it starts on the inside. It starts with your personal belief, what you are able to imagine for yourself, the freedom you are able to imagine for yourself, you can then create. I think a lot of us are asking for freedom, but have never sat down and had a conversation with ourselves about what that freedom would actually look like. And that's the problem. Because we are asking someone else to give us a need that we are not clear on, you know, having a need that we are not clear on. So we have to get clear on what that actually looks like for us. And I think media is plays such an important role in that process of imagination and reimagining the world, because we don't have, as Black Americans, we don't have a connection, as much of a connection to deities and heroes and you know, our ancestors, unless we intentionally go out and seek them. These aren't things that are taught and reinforced in school. And so we have to go out and find these things for ourselves. But through the media, we get the opportunity to see people who look like us, you know, occupying spaces that maybe aren't historically occupied by Black people. But not just that, you know, archetypes is like a big thing for me, like looking at the energy of a person and then being able to go forth and embody that, looking at the energy of an ancestor and then being able to go forth and embody that, looking at the, you know. And so I think that's what media can do. It can give someone the opportunity to look at the energy, look at the blueprint that someone has created, and then go forth and embody that and integrate that into their being, you know. And I think that's what imagination allows us to do. It opens us up to the possibility of who we could be, who we could transform into, who we could become. So yeah, I think it's just extremely important that we cultivate that. And personally, you know, it's hard for me because I want to remain aware of what's going on. But I also don't want that awareness to take away from, because what I create comes from love. It comes from a place of, you know, it comes from a place of just like light. And so I don't want that awareness of what's going on to then dim that light or take away that love. And I don't want everything that I create to be in reaction to whiteness. And I think that's also something to be aware of too, is like we can't continue to just center our art around the white gaze. This is something that Toni Morrison talks about. It's like, what is the Black experience outside of the white gaze? Like, what are we talking to each other about? What are we don't have to include necessarily that into our experience, into our art. We can make art for each other. We can make art that just illuminates the love and illuminates the beauty, and isn't necessarily just in reaction to the oppression that we are experiencing.
Which I think is why this fight is really a global experience. So often I've heard this idea of like, if it doesn't pertain to you, if it's not happening around you, then you're not caring about it.
Right.
And what this year, what the past couple years I think have really exemplified to me is how strangely parallel so many of our experiences. At the same time, they're distinctly different depending on what community you're from. But when I'm looking at this moment in which we are seeing global revolutions, we are seeing people coming together and uprising in ways that we haven't before, it's also spoken to the importance of creating that connectivity between us all. And when I'm thinking even of the people that may be listening now who are a part of the creative space, that idea of the project of detaching from the white gaze isn't just a Black project. It's something that I think similarly frees them. I don't know if we've even began to experience the beginnings of the power of creativity and the power of our imagination until we can detach from these things and create art genuinely for ourselves or from our souls. And I was even reading recently, I was in conversation and I've been in this class, which has been incredible, that's really centering on African philosophy. But the first thing we learned about was about how African philosophy has influenced the world. And it was such an impactful moment because there are so many people, anthropologists, etc., who have said that I think Ethiopian and Egypt philosophy is literally the foundation for what we consider Greco-Roman, what we consider the foundation of democracy, the foundation of rationality, all these concepts that I think we've always associated with the European world. And what I love the most is that this conversation, the way that these writers were talking about it, it's not to discredit at all. It is not a way to debase what Greece has provided, what Rome has provided, what every part of the world has provided to our national conversation. But it was the importance of reinserting a whole community that has been left out.
Right.
And it's really, to me, highlighted the importance of, when we're talking about going back to our ancestors, talking about this being a collective experience. We need it as a community, but we similarly need other people to be familiar with us. There's something really beautiful in having to be familiar. I know for myself, I've had to be familiar with dominant culture my entire life.
Right.
And I think many people can experience that, and many people relate to that experience, but there's something that is impactful when the tables are turned and there's a sense of reciprocity of having to know about us and our histories.
Yes.
And again, going back to the importance of media, I don't know how many things I've learned from billboards, from editorials.
Right.
When I think about the amount of times an image has driven me to the mood board or the inspiration, and the inspiration drives me to learn something about some other person,
Right.
there are so many beautiful and subtle ways to reinforce this narrative in a way that even if people aren't comfortable, even if people don't feel like their place in this conversation is to be at the forefront educating people, everyone has the potential with their platform to do something so beautiful. I say that just to reaffirm everything that you've said. I just wanted to, I know you've already discussed it, but I wanted to talk particularly about your inspiration. If there are resources, books, places, music that you would turn people to, I'd love to know.
It's such a huge source of inspiration for me ever since my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a lot. So much of the information that I have about our social structure comes from music, comes from listening to what people call conscious rappers, but just rappers and musicians who spread awareness, like Lauryn Hill, like
Mm-hmm.
Erykah Badu, Kanye. Well, I'm gonna keep that one off. We're not gonna talk about that one. Old Kanye. But people who have used their platform, used their voice, used their music to just spread a message and spread awareness about what's going on right now. What am I listening to? I swear I listen to the same songs from like 2012 over and over. So
Me too.
I listen to Channel Orange still every day. I think Control is still a great album. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still like recycling music from 2016. So
Yeah, no, I do that too. I think I have a playlist just called 2017 where
a
I'm
lot of
like, I just want to
music,
go back.
a lot
But
of good
even
music, and
rap,
that
I
was
was listening to, I don't know if you watched the Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj, and um, he did one on rap, but it also spoke to just our connectivity as a people because he was talking about how an art form created in the Bronx has literally been a rallying cry for people globally. It's been a format for people in which we're going all the way to Thailand, and the people on the forefront of that movement are rappers who are saying, oh, well, I was inspired by Childish Gambino. Well, I was inspired by these other people. And I love when we give credit where credit is due, because I think it continues to reinforce the importance of conscious collaboration.
100%. And I think music is a universal language, and it is the language of our universe. And I think we have to come to understand that too. When people talk about raising your frequency and your vibration, you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about music. You're talking about your internal harmonics. You're talking about the frequency that you're emitting out into the world that is then attracting experiences of that same frequency back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our universe works in vibration. I think when we can come to understand this, we'll be in such a different place collectively,
Mm-hmm.
because we will realize that so much of our reality can be shaped just by reshaping ourselves internally
Mm-hmm.
and adjusting that harmonic frequency.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm looking, a lot of these questions, I feel like people projected exactly where this conversation was going to go. So I know we've discussed a lot of these, but I love how tapped in people are. Um, but I am looking to see if we can end with a great question. It's super cool. I wish you could see just how many people are tuned in. I am seeing all sorts of languages, which is pretty incredible.
That's awesome.
And there's so many compliments. Again, I just want to screenshot this to share with you how how people are reacting. Okay, this is speaking of imagination. I feel like this is an interesting question to end on because this is a challenge to even myself. Um, if you could time travel, what would you say to your future self?
I actually believe in time travel. But I would say to my future self that, geez, dang, that's a hard question. Because my
Mm-hmm.
future self says a lot to me, like I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I need to tune into her, and she's always giving me guidance and wisdom, and I'm able to just like attune myself to um, the energy and the frequency of the person I, aspire to become, and what does that look
Mhm.
like? How do I, walk in her? But if I had to say something to her, I guess I would just say thank you.
Mhm.
There's just a deep gratitude for her guidance and her love, her unconditional love, because I've made so many mistakes, too many mistakes to count. And I've been through so many different phases, and yet I know that her potentiality still remains. Her love for me still remains.
Mhm.
Her guidance has never left me. So just pure gratitude.
I love that. That's just a perfect place to end on. Just that reminder that no one will love you as unconditionally as your future self.